Let me just wait a few minutes to make sure that everything is working correctly. All right. Looks like everything is working fine. Cool. Now let me just give you all a few minutes to join. Um, and let's just remember what we're going to do today. Today's an exciting day. We're going to learn about the map and the reduce functions in DataWeave. So let me just check that this is working. Test. And I am not seeing the comments. Hmm. Alrighty. Um, I think I don't see the comments from LinkedIn, so let me know. Can someone like post something? All right, that's fine, I guess. So I'm not sure if I will be able to see your comments in LinkedIn, but I will for sure be able to see your comments from Twitch. And let me just double check that actually. Twitch. Let's try this out. Test. All right, yeah, I can see the comments from Twitch. Oh yeah, I can see the comments from LinkedIn as well. Cool. All right, so I don't know why my test didn't work then, but I can see my comment from Twitch here. And I can see a comment from LinkedIn. So, hi. Thank you all for joining today. So, yes, today we are going to talk about DataWeave and we are going to see the map and the reduce functions. Hi. More people joining. Thank you. Where are you coming from? What time is it? Is it night, morning, afternoon? Are you getting ready for bed? Are you getting started? Are you having your morning coffee? What's going on with you? Hello, I see you. Hi. LinkedIn user. Hello. All right. Yay. Okay, that's working. So that's good to know. All right, now we're gonna get started with our map and reduce tutorials. I'm just going to go through all of this so you can kind of get a better feeling of what is in this tutorial or in these two tutorials, but I will also gladly accept any kind of question. So hi, afternoon. Yes, it is afternoon here as well. So it's 1:30 for me. I am in Eastern time. I don't know what time is it for all of you. Bangalore, it's 11 p.m. Oh, wow. Well, that's commitment. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. It's so late for you, so thank you. Thank you. I feel honored. Alrighty, so we're going to start with the map tutorial. I am in the tutorial, so let me put this in the comments. Hold on. So if you go to developer.mulesop.com/tutorials and how-tos /dataweave/map function, you will be able to see this tutorial that I'm going to go through. If you want to follow through, if not, then that is fine. Hello, Muleys. Hi, Prashant. Hi. I just keep saying hi to all of you to get started. Joined from Canada. Hey, me too. What part of Canada? Are you in the Pacific or are you in the Eastern like me or are you in the middle mountain? Let me know. All right, so I will get started, but I will still see all of your beautiful comments. So, first of all, let me just tell you that this tutorial was mostly created by MuleSoft Ambassador alumni Joshua Ernie. So if you want to learn more about Josh, you can just go into his LinkedIn profile right here. And he also has another website, journey.io, if you want to take a look at it. He mainly writes about DataWeave. Hello, which is awesome. So you can go ahead and check it out. Hi. Mountain, Edmonton. Yay. Nice. So it's still morning, I think, for you, or noon, or something like that. All right. So yes, if you are not familiar with Map and this is your first live stream, let me know in the comments or in the chat if you're on Twitch. I would be glad to go through this like in detail if you're new to DataWeave at all, or if you have like a structured programming language background or an object-oriented programming language background. That will be helpful for me to give you more details and to explain more or less how this works from that perspective. Because as it says here, if you come from a different development background, you may know this function as for or for each. But since this is a functional programming language, it doesn't work exactly the same way as you are thinking. When you have a for or a for each, you have to go through a loop and essentially like continue going through the loop until you finish. And you can have variables, for example, counters, and you can like continue iterating and do something with the counter, like for example, have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this is not how map works. Since we are on a functional programming language, this is just executed as a function altogether. So it's not actually going through an iteration, like a sequential iteration one by one. Rather, it's just executing everything. um, but if you are looking for the same functionality from a for or a for each, for example, that is an iteration, a sequential iteration by line, then reduce is for you. And we will talk about reduce in a moment. I will get started with the map first. So yes, if you want to learn about the differences between DataWeave as a functional programming language and imperative programming, then you can check out this documentation on your own. I'm not going to go through it unless you really want me to, but for now, we'll just continue. And also a tip, if you're not familiar with the DataWeave Playground, you can run all of these examples within the DataWeave Playground. So you don't have to install Anypoint Studio, you don't have to do anything on your computer. You can do it all from your browser. So let's go ahead and open the DataWeave Playground. I'm just going to click here where it says DataWeave Playground, and it will open a new window with the playground. Here we go. Also, if you are not familiar with the DataWeave Playground, you can click on this link, which says check out this tutorial. And this will bring you to our other tutorial to learn DataWeave with the online DataWeave Playground and interactive tutorial. So you can just go ahead and go through this to learn how all of the parts from the DataWeave Playground works if you're not familiar with it. If you are, then let's just go ahead. So feel free to ask me any questions if I am confusing you or if you want me to explain something once more. That's fine by me. So, all right, we have here the DataWeave Playground, and I'm just going to leave it there. Also, some prerequisites. If you are new to DataWeave, we strongly recommend, hello from Morocco, hello. We strongly recommend that you go through these other parts. So what is DataWeave part 1 through part 5? You can also find it here in this side. 1 is the basics, 2 is selectors, 3 is variables, flow control, and functions, 4 is lambdas, and 5 is generics. So if you are not, if you're not familiar with any of those, we recommend that you go through those first to get a better feeling of what is DataWeave and how is it used and what you can do with it. So after you go through the prerequisites, they're not required for the tutorial. You can follow the tutorial without going through the prerequisites, that's fine. But if you're not familiar with DataWeave, you're not gonna be able to understand a lot of this. So first of all, we have the syntax. So in the map function, we have two different, how do you say that? Parameters. You have two different parameters. The first one is the array that you want to go through with the map. And the second one is a lambda function. So this lambda function is going to be useful to do whatever transformation you want to do to the items of the array. So as you can see this, in this lambda function, we have the same lambda function has two different parameters. It has a t and it has a type number. So again, for the map, you just have two parameters, the array and the lambda. But then for the lambda, which is this one right here, you have yet another two parameters. One parameter is of type t, which means like it can be any type, and a number. And then the result of that will be r. So in the final array that we'll have from the map, we will be resulting in an array with the type r. And the type r is whatever was thrown back from the lambda. And this t, this type t, is the array, the type of the items that come inside the array. So if your input array is an array of numbers, then this will be a number. And this other parameter will also be a number, will always be a number. But this first one will be whatever you send here. If you have an array of strings, then this will be a string. If you have an array of objects, then this will be an object, and so on. So in the final result, this doesn't necessarily have to be a number or a string or an object. It's just like whatever transformation you do with the information from the input is what's going to be resulted. And then you will end up with an array of that type that you modified, and not necessarily the type that it was inputted, unless like you want that to be. And this will come together with the examples. So don't worry if you don't understand yet. So in this example, it's also nice to know that there are two notations. Again, if you haven't gone through the prerequisites section, we explain what are prefix and infix and $sign syntax in those prerequisites, but I'm going to go through them really quickly. So in the prefix notation, if I copy this and I put it in my DataWeave playground, we end up with this output. Let me make this bigger. So notice how we have the map at the beginning, and then we have our array, which is 1, 2, 3, an array of numbers. And then here we have the lambda. So this is the type of the item, which is a number. And this will always be a number because it's the index of each item. And then with that information, what we do is just add 1 into the number that we already have. So we end up with 2, 3, 4 when our input array was 1, 2, 3. If we want to like add 2, we end up with 3, 4, 5, and so on. This is just a simple case, so you can kind of see how it works. This is a syntax that we saw in the syntax session as well. What happened? Oh, I think because, okay. Yeah, because of the Zoom. All right, so that was a prefix notation. And then if we take the infix notation, this is the most used notation. So if you are familiar with DataWeave, this is what you may have seen in your code, because this is what most of the people use. It's exactly the same functionality that we just saw, but now we have the array first, 1, 2, 3 at the beginning. Then we have the function, which is map. Oh, you know what? Let me put that here so you can see the difference. This is a prefix, and then we have the infix. I'm just going to copy this part, put it here. So now we have here, instead of having first the function and then the input array, we have first the input array and then the function, and then we just have the lambda at the end. So we have our first parameter at the beginning, then the function, and then the second parameter. And then in the lambda, it's exactly the same as we had before. Is the number, the index of the number, and then we do number plus 1, we end up with 2, 3, and 4. And we can also modify this to be 2, and we end up with 3, 4, and 5. Cool. And now there's another tip. When using the infix notation, you don't have to include all the parameters in the lambda if you're not using them. However, you do have to include the previous parameters to the left, my left, whether you're using them or not. You can only remove the parameters to the right. This means, for this example, I'm not using num index anywhere in this functionality that I have here. I'm just using num. So I can remove num index and it will still work. Because I'm just using num and this is a first parameter, I can do that. But if, let's say, we were using num index here instead of num, so I can't just remove num from this because then it will think that I'm referring to the first parameter instead of the second parameter. So here I'm using num index, which starts at 0. So it's 0, 1, and 2. And I add 2 to the indexes. So I end up with 2, 3, and 4. And if I remove the num from here, it's going to go back to 3, 4, and 5 because it thinks that I'm talking about the first parameter, not the second parameter. So you can remove the parameters as long as it's like the one to the left. You can remove the ones to the right. If we had more parameters here to the right and we're using num index, we could remove those other parameters, but we cannot remove num because it's to the left. All right. Or if you want to see it in a different way, you always have to have the previous parameters, but you can remove the next parameters from the ones that you are using. All right, so this was num. And here is the example again that I just showed you. Since num is the first parameter, we can also use the following code without the num index. Now, $ syntax. I'm just going to copy this because I want to leave the other ones here for you to compare. Now, in this case, we are using the $ syntax. Again, if you are not familiar with it, you can go to the prerequisites section and read all about the $ syntax. But in summary, the parameters that we have here inside lambda, we have 2, num and num index. They can be replaced with $signs. So this is our first parameter, so it's going to be $1. This is our second parameter, and it's going to be $2. So let me do this step by step so you can see what I mean. This is basically 1, and this is 2. And if you had more, it would be 3, 4, 5, or whatever. And then here, you're using the first one, so it would be like this. And if you wanted to do this, you don't need, with the $ syntax, you don't need to specify this part, which is the input parameters. You just have to specify this second part because DataWeave automatically knows that you're referring to the parameters from the input. So here in this case, we are summing the 2 parameters, but if we wanted to have the other thing, so num plus 1, just as we have here, we end up again with 2, 3, 4 because we had 1, 2, 3 plus 1, 2, 3, 4. Or we can put it as 2, and instead of 1, 2, 3, now we end up with 3, 4, 5. And what I did here was that I was adding both parameters. So we had the first parameter, which is 1, 2, and 3, and the second parameter, which is the index of the items, which is going to be 0, 1, and 2. and we end up with 1, 3, and 5. Also, if you want to check what each parameter means, you can do this. And here you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, because this is the input parameter, the items. And if I add another $sign here, this is the second parameter, which is 0, 1, and 2. So again, if we sum, where is it? If we sum 1, 2, 3 plus 0, 1, and 2, we end up with 1, 3, and 5. That's how it works. World-class DataWeave operators workshop, hands-on practice. DataWeave Playground is very useful. It is indeed. I love it. I always use it. All right, now that we understand the basics of the syntax, we can move on. Oh, and you can also see like the same example that we just saw, but using the named parameters. So instead of doing this, you can do this. And it's exactly the same. We end up with 1, 3, and 5. So as you can see, you are basically removing the input, leaving just the function, and then replacing these with the $signs, depending on which number of parameter it is. Hi. All right, and then if we continue now, let's see some examples. Modify the items in an array of strings. So in this script, you're going to add hello to the beginning of the string in the input array. Let's put it here. So we have this array, Max, Dave, and Alex. And then we end up with the same array, but now it has hello Max, hello Dave, and hello Alex. And we're doing that by using the map function after the array. And then we're using the $sign syntax. We are adding hello world, well, hello, comma, space in a string. And then using the plus plus function, we add the first parameter. If you were to add the second parameter, then it would be hello 0, hello 1, and hello 2, if you wanted to speak in robot or something like that. Just kidding. So that's how you can do that. This is a straightforward example because this is a string, an array of strings, and we are just adding another string into that first string. So our type will end up being an array of strings either way. Now, yeah, also if you're not familiar with the plus plus function, it can be used with two strings to concatenate into a new string. If you want to learn all the different ways to use the plus plus function, because it can also be used with arrays and objects, you can go to the MuleSoft documentation or this developer tutorial to learn more about it. So yes, in this example, we use the infix notation and the $sign syntax. But if you wanted to use still the infix notation, but the named parameters, then you can also do something like this. Maybe this is clear for you. So it doesn't matter performance-wise. Both $sign and named parameters work exactly the same. It's just like your personal preference if you prefer to have the parameters named or if you just prefer to see the $signs. And it's exactly the same. All right. Now, another example to enrich existing data. Now we have an input payload of 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to put it here. I have here the 1, 2, and 3. And now our script, let's copy and paste it. And our script, it's taking the payload, which is 1, 2, 3, the input parameter, and then it's using map, and then it's creating a new object. And inside the new object, we're going to have number, the field number, and the value is going to be the item, so 1, 2, or 3. And then we're creating another field called type. Notice that this field has quotes. That is because type is a reserved word. So if you try to do that, it's going to tell you like that's an invalid input. So that's why we're surrounding it in quotes. And then we're doing a condition here. So we're saying if the number is even, then we're going to write even. If it's not even, then we're going to write odd. So we end up with this. Now this is an array of objects. This is not, remember, like on the last one, we were transforming an array of strings into another array of strings. But now for this one, we are transforming an array of numbers into an array of objects. So here now we have three different objects and they have the fields number and type. Here. So number one is an odd number, so it says odd. Number two is an even number, so it says even. And number three is again an odd number, so it says odd. This is just a transformation that we're using as an example here. And the is even function, it basically just returns true or false depending on if the number is even or not. Really straightforward. So let me know if you had any questions with that code. I'm going a little bit fast because I am assuming that you are familiar with DataWeave and that you just want to learn more about map and reduce. But if you are not familiar with DataWeave and you have questions about anything that you're seeing right now, please ask in LinkedIn or Twitch, and I will gladly be able to answer that question for you. And here, if you want to learn more about the is-even function, you can check out this documentation. We can also remove unnecessary data. This is another use case that you can do. So this is our input payload. I'm gonna put it here. This is an array of objects, and each object has employee, ID, phone, and contract. So employee, for example, can be Josh, ID is a number, phone is a string, and contract is also a string, so it can be like full-time and part-time. And then let's take this script, put it here. So now we transformed this whole input payload into this output payload. Now we only have employee and contract. We don't really care about the ID or the phone for this specific transformation, so we just remove them. And also notice that the contract now just says full or part, but it doesn't say full-time or part-time as it did before. And we were able to do that using this index selector. I think it's the index selector. So if you say, for example, if we take this out, it will say everything, full-time and part-time. And if we put it back, it is cut because it is taking whatever you have in this string from the 0 position up into the 3rd position. So it starts at 0, 1, 2, and 3. And we have the full. And the same for this. We have 0, 1, 2, and 3. And we have parts. If we wanted to add more, we can just put this 0 to 5, for example. And you can just modify that. That's just an example. The focus here is that you're using map and you are mapping the employee and the contract, but you are not mapping the other two fields. So you can also do that. You can remove stuff. And to learn more about the range selector, it was a range selector. It was close. You can check out this documentation or this developer tutorial. Now, you can also use the index as a key. And here we're going to see two different examples, one being the explicit lambda or the named parameters, and the other one is going to be with the $sign. So let's take this input payload. It's just an array of strings, has Josh, Max, Alex, and Dave. And then in the script, Now we're doing this, remember this is with the explicit lambda, so we're using the named parameters, value, and index. And then with that, we are creating an object. So we had an array of strings and we end up with an array of objects. And now we're saying index plus 1, that will be the first field. In this case, for example, we have 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. Because the index starts at 0, and then we add 1, so we end up, instead of being 0, 1, 2, 3, it's now 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the value, which is the same as the beginning, Josh, Max, Alex, and Dave. Then another example, for the second field, we're just putting the index without doing the plus 1. So we end up with 0, 1, 2, and 3. And the value again. Now for the third one, this is just to demonstrate how the parentheses and the quotes work when you're using them for the keys or the fields. In these two, we have parentheses. Let me make this bigger. We have parentheses here, and then this doesn't have parentheses, and then this one has quotes. And then for the value, this one is just value, this one is value in parentheses, this one is again just value, and this one is value in quotes. So you can see what the different behaviors are of that. So in the third one, we have index, and guess what happens here? It's not outputting the index like before, so it's not 0. Now it just says index. Because in order to reference a value or like a parameter from the lambda or a variable or stuff like that, in the key part, you have to put parentheses. Otherwise, it's just going to output the hard-coded value that you put there. And then for the value, just the same as before, so it still works as expected. In the final field, we're using index in quotes and value in quotes. So this is again taking the literal meaning of the word. So it's just outputting index and value instead of outputting the like 0 in Josh, for example. So it's not taking the actual value from the parameter, it's just outputting the hard-coded string. So that's good for you to know in case you want to output. It also works with variables. For example, var test. And if I were to, I can actually create just another object. If I were to put test and test, I would end up with test and test because it's just taking the, oh, you know what, let me put this test value. So the first one is taking the hard-coded test value that I'm putting instead of the value that I want. And then in the value, it's actually taking the value from the variable because you don't need to do anything here. But then if I put this key in parentheses, then it's going to put test value and test value. So it depends on what you want to do. If you just want to hard code this, then just put it without parentheses. Or if you want to take the value from that variable or from that parameter, then put it in parentheses. Cool. And now the same example, but now using the $ syntax. And notice how I added here a number because I wanted you to see how the numbers behave in this case. All right. So first one is, maybe I can just comment this for now. So we still have an array. Now we have an array of strings and numbers, and we end up with an array of objects. So our first field is the second parameter. We're using the $ syntax now. This is the second parameter, which is the index of our item plus 1. This is going to be the key. And then the value is going to be the first parameter, which is the actual item. So we end up with 1 Josh, 2 Max, 3 Alex, and 4 15, because I put a number here. Now the second one, we are putting in parentheses the dollar, the second parameter, which is the index, and then the value we're putting in parentheses the value, the actual value, the first parameter. So we end up with the same as before, 0 Josh, 1 Max, 2 Alex, and 3 15. The only difference is that in the previous example, we were adding a 1 and now we're not. So that's why it starts at 0. Now the third example is putting in quotes the dollar sign, so the double dollar sign, which is the second parameter, and then as a value, it's also putting in quotes the first dollar sign or the first parameter. And notice like this is different from the previous example, because in the previous example, when we put quotes, it ended up being the literal value of whatever we had. But with the dollar sign syntax, this works differently. Now we end up with the 0, 1, 2, and 3, same as before, and Josh, Max, Alex, and 15, same as before. The only thing that I want you to look at is a number 15. So in the previous one, we just had the dollar sign, the single dollar sign. It doesn't matter if it's in parentheses or without parentheses. You end up with a number 15. Like it is a type number. But if you put it in quotes, then it ends up being a string 15 instead of a number 15. So that's something that you have to take into account as well. And I will explain in a moment why, briefly. And finally, if you do want to output the hard-coded strings of double dollar sign and single dollar sign, you have to use the escape character, which is like the backslash, yes. So we end up with backslash dollar, and then as the value backslash dollar as well, in quotes, and you end up with everything being exactly the same because it's hard coded. All right, so now let's dig into why is this working like this? Why is the first one a number and why is the second one a string? And you can see that here. Yes. So here is the whole explanation. You might be wondering why is the last item from the input array a 15 instead of a string? This can give us a better picture of how the codes will look on this syntax. If we use quotes dollar sign in the value portion of the object, the number 15 gets transformed into a string. Note that using the syntax, we can correctly reference the index just by using double dollar sign in quotes, whereas in the last example, index in quotes gave us a hard-coded value instead of the reference. So to learn more about concatenation in DataWeave, check out this developer tutorial. And unfortunately, this is in the old version of the tutorials. We haven't yet worked on this, but here you can see how this works. Here's an example somewhere. Here. If you use, for example, everything in between quotes, you can reference to different values. Let me see if I have that code. I don't. All right, let me just do something really quick. So if I have quotes here, and let me create a variable, var again test, and then here value. I have quotes and I write test. It doesn't do anything, right? It just outputs test because that's expected. But then what happens if I put dollar sign and then, oh, actually just like that works. So if you put dollar sign and then test, it's taking whatever is the value instead of taking the actual literal hard-coded value. Let me put another test 2, value 2. And then, for example, if I do here test 2, now it's, instead of having to do a plus plus, use a plus plus function, we can just do it right here. So for example, if I had hello and then world, I can just do this and it will take the two variables and input them here. Or if I wanted to add more stuff, I can still add it here. And it's very simple to use. Instead of using the plus plus function, that would have to be test plus plus and then space and then plus plus and then test2 and then plus plus and then whatever else you wanted. So instead of doing all that, you can just put quotes, put the $sign, test space $sign, test2, and then whatever you want. So you see, like, you're not using so many functions. You're using the plus plus function here 3 times, and you just have the quotes right here, and it's just better to use. But anyway, that was just like a fun thing for you to learn. And that's it for map. Let me know if you have questions. I am going to go through reduce because I want to finish this on time. But if you have any questions about map, please feel free to tell me and I can just come back and continue with that. So now let's go into the reduce function. Also notice we have tutorials for this distinct by, filter, filter object, group by, map, which is the one that we just saw, map object, pluck, and reduce. And additionally, from all the functions, we also have 3 different tutorials. One to learn how to extract the keys from an object using keys of, names of, or pluck. Another one to learn how to compare different data types in DataWeave using the equality operators. And the third one, how to merge from 2 arrays using map and group by in DataWeave. These ones are awesome. You should go ahead and take a look at them. For now, let's just go to the reduce tutorial to learn how to use reduce using the tutorial. And once more, this tutorial was mostly created by MuleSoft ambassador Joshua Ernie. So kudos, Josh. Thank you for creating this. And as you can see from the beginning, the reduce function is about as close as we get to a general purpose looping tool in DataWeave. Remember that I told you in the previous tutorial, like map is kind of similar to for or for each, but it's not actually providing you the tools to loop by like line number or do sequential loops. Well, with reduce, you can do that. You can do a sequential loops, you can put counters, you can count stuff and stuff like that. Just a regular for or for each would do. So if you come from a different development background, it's something similar to a while or the while or for each, I guess. Or maybe not. I think it's more similar to while or do while. It's not really doing like a for. Well, I'm not sure, but you can judge for yourself. And again, you can try all of these examples in the DataWeave Playground. You can click there to access the DataWeave Playground directly or check out the tutorial to learn more about it. And again, the prerequisites, if you are not familiar with DataWeave, you can just go through the parts 1 through 5 to learn the basics. Now, the syntax for reduce, it starts with the input parameter, which is an array of type t, and then our lambda, just as we had in map, we had an input parameter and then a lambda. But in this case, the lambda is accepting a type t, which is each of the items inside the input array. And the second parameter, instead of being a number, as we saw in map, like you had the index of the number, this is an r. I'm going to explain why. But after you do the lambda, you will end up with the type r, which is from the second parameter, and the whole result of the reduce is going to be r. Notice that map was returning an array of R, which was the second type from our lambda. But in this case, we're not getting an array of R, we're getting just R. So this can be whatever you want. You can have an input array of strings, objects, numbers, arrays, you name it. And the output can still be whatever you want. It can be number, it can be a string, an array, an object, just whatever you want. So this is why reduce is so powerful, because it can completely transform the input array into something different. All right. So an example using the prefix notation. Let's copy this, put it here, and we don't need anything here in the input. So we have this reduce. Again, this is a prefix notation. You might not see this a lot of times because we're putting the function first and then the rest of the code, which is not the best practice, or well, it is a best practice, just whatever your preference is. So people prefer to use the infix notation instead of the prefix notation. So you have the input array, which is 1, 2, 3, and then you do some magic and you end up with 6. And basically what happens here, I'm gonna put it here, you have the lambda and you have the first item, which is n, which is the item, so 1, 2, and 3. And then my second parameter can be whatever I want. So in this case, I want it to be a number. So the second parameter is going to be called total. And the first, this is kind of like an accumulator that you can use. And the first value that it's going to start with, it's going to be 0. Again, if you come from a for each type of mentality, you will know that you can put in the for or in the for each, you can add a counter and you can do whatever you want with that counter. So this is kind of like that. You're adding the first counter. The only difference is that this doesn't have to be a number. This can be whatever you want. It can be an array, it can be an object, it can be a string, you name it. And what we're doing here is adding total plus n. So we start with 0, and it goes 0 plus 1, it's 1. And then 1 plus 2, and we have 3. And then 3 plus 3, and we end up with 6. So that's what happens. I'm going to show you how this iteration works in a moment. For now, let's just continue with the tutorial because it's going to come eventually. So yes, we did that. It looks different because I did a lot of zoom, but don't worry, it's the same thing. Now we have the infix notation. I'm gonna copy this and put it here. Oh, actually, I'm just gonna copy this thing so you can kind of see what we did before. You can see the differences. All right, so before we had the reduce function first, and then inside the reduce function, we had our first parameter, which was the array, and the second parameter, which was the lambda function. In this case, we're using the infix notation. So we have our array first, then our function reduce, and then the rest of our lambda. So this is doing exactly the same. It is just written in a different manner. So we still end up with 6. It's still just doing a summatory, I guess that's how you call it in English, of all of the numbers. And again, the same tip that we saw before, you don't always need to assign an initial value to the accumulator. Oh, well, this is not the same as before. But you don't always need to assign an initial value to the accumulator in the lambda. For example, we put total equals 0. If the initial value for the accumulator is not set, then the accumulator is set to the first element of the input array. For example, if we do this instead, let me copy this comment and put it here. So if we didn't put here the total equals 0, it would still work in this case, because in this case we have the first item, which is a number. So it's just going to assume that the first item is a number, and it automatically does the rest of the things. But if, for example, here, this was a string instead of a number, oh, it still works. How awesome. All right. What if I put strings everywhere? That still work? Well, it is smart enough to do the changes on the functions to do all of this. Cool. But anyway, if DataWeave did not take care of that for you, then you would assume that that was a string. And we can see in more examples how would that work. Now, the $sign syntax, so you can also keep that in mind. Let me put this back in numbers. Comment. Oops. Now we have 1, 2, 3, read this, and then now we're doing $sign plus $sign. Remember, we saw earlier that the $signs, the number of $signs depends on the number of the parameter from the lambda. So let me take this, put it here. This is basically like instead of n, we would have $1. Instead of total, we would have $2 signs. And then in the end, we would be total. So 2 signs, and n would be 1 sign. And finally, we don't need to put this first thing. So that's how we end up with this part. So for the $sign syntax, exactly the same functionality can be achieved using the $sign plus $sign, because it's just going to keep doing the sum right there. For this specific case, for others, might not be that simple. So there, now that we understand that, oh yeah, also, you won't be able to specify a different accumulator type with this syntax, with the $sign syntax. You will have to use explicit lambda in order to specify a different accumulator type. In this case, because our array is of numbers and we want to have a number at the end, then that's fine. But if we wanted to change the type, then we would need to use the other explicit lambda. So step-by-step process to illustrate this is what happens. On the first iteration, no default value is provided. So again, this case or this case, because on these two cases, we are providing the total equals 0. But assuming that we're using these two, where no default value is provided, then the value, either n or single $sign, starts at 2. Where is this 2? Oh, we're just using another example. Okay. So let's say that this is 2, for example. And then the accumulator, so total or double $sign is 1, for example. Then the lambda would be 2, 1. So this would be 1 plus 2. Oh, this is just the number of the accumulator. Well, either way, that's what happens. And now this is the value. Okay. And it returns 3. We refer to this value as the accumulator. It is used to accumulate the result as reduce iterates through the input array. And then reduce then moves to the next iteration. So the second iteration is going to start at 3. Wait, why did that happen? Where is this one? So this starts with 2 and then adds 1, and then this is 3. Oh, I see. So the first iteration, our n parameter is going to be 2, because this is the second item. And the first item, since we are not adding a total here, it's just going to take the first item, literally the first item that it finds. So 1 plus 2 equals 3, and then 3 plus 3 equals 6. And I'm gonna show that in the logs as well. So yes, the second iteration is 3 plus 3 and then equals 6. So notice the first value is 3, the last value of the input array, and the second value is 3 as well, because that was the previous value of the accumulator. Correct. So here, if you're familiar with the log function, if not, you can just click on it and go and check out the documentation. You can use the following code to see the iterations and their values in the console. So just copy this thing and paste it here. I'm gonna comment this again. So now, if I take a look at the logs, what's happening? All right. We have 1, 2, 3, and then reduce, and then let's output what comes here as result. This is a little bit weird to see, but we are logging the result at the end, and then we're logging each iteration the value, which is the double dollar sign, which is the n, so 1, 2, and 3. And then we're also logging the accumulator, which is the single dollar sign. Isn't that the other way around though? Yeah, it's the other way around. Sorry, I will change that. All right, so the value is the first parameter, which is n, and then the accumulator is the second parameter, which is total. So in the first part, we have value as 2, as we saw earlier, because we are not specifying a initial value. So we have value 2, accumulator 1, and then the result is 3. I don't know if you can see that. All right. So the first value, the first iteration value is 1, accumulator is 2, value is 2, accumulator is 1, and the result is 3. And then for the second iteration, value is 3, accumulator is 3. Oh, and I cannot see the last one for some reason. Oh, because it just gives the results? Is that it? Or am I just not being able to see this? Or if I reload? Sometimes it behaves weird when you have a zoom for your screen. Oh no, that's it. All right, so yes, just does the final thing, which is value 3, accumulator 3, and then outputs 6. But then what would happen if I were to use these other functionalities? So let me take this and let's put that in logs. Right, so here, reduce n, total equals 0. So first, let's log the total. Log total. All right, so first we have total 0, 1, and 2. I hate this. All right, there you go. So total we have 0, 1, and 3, which is like, first we have 0 plus 1, 1, right? Right? No. Let me do the other log. Log, no, this is the result. Yes, yes. Just ignore me. I will show you. And then we have, let's put number. And here, let me put the accumulator instead. All right, so accumulator starts at 0 and the number is 1. So 0 plus 1 will give us 1. So now the accumulator is 1 and the number is now 2. We're in the second iteration. So 2 plus 1 is going to be 3. Now the accumulator is 3, and I think that's the last one, right? 3, and then plus 3, and it's going to give us 6. I don't know why. There you go. Accumulator is 3, and then number is 3, and 3 plus 3 is going to give us 6. So again, first accumulator is 0 because we put it there. Then the number is going to be 1 because it's the first number. Numbers are, this is what comes from the input array. So 1, 2, and 3 are the numbers. The accumulator starts at 0, 0 plus 1, 1, and then 1 plus 2, 3, and then 3 plus 3, and gives us 6. So now, here we have 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3. And if I take out this total, so if I take out the initial value, then this is going to be 1 iteration less there. So now we have accumulator that starts at 1 because it's taking the first value that we have here. And then the number is 2 because it's taking the second value from here. So 1 plus 2 equals 3, and then 3 plus 3 equals 6. So this is doing 1 less iteration because we are taking the first accumulation from the first item instead of having to manually put here the 0. It is doing 3 iterations, and the other way around is doing just 2 iterations. Whew, so that was a lot. All right. We're kind of at time, but I will continue with this. So now if you want to transform an array to an object, you can take, for example, this input payload. We have an array of objects. Let me remove all of this. We have an array of objects, and we have ID and name. And this is just going to be the ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and the name dev, test, UAT, or production, their environments. And now with the script, we put it here, and we now are changing completely. Instead of having an array of objects, we end up with just one object that has the name of the environment at the beginning and then the ID of the environment at the value. So to do that, we did a reduce, and then our first parameter is going to be called env. And notice, like here, we do have to use the accumulator and put a default value here, because otherwise, if we did not do this, it will take the first value, which is this. Or actually, would it work? Not right. No, it didn't work. Okay. Yes, so we have to put this because we're changing the output completely. So we have to put what is our initial value. So our initial value is object, an empty object, and we're doing that empty object plus plus, which is going to add a second object. And here we're adding the other object, which is, as a key, we have environment.name, which comes from the input. And then as the value, we're putting environment.id. If we wanted to change this, so to have the ID as a key and the name as the value, then we would have to just swap this ID and this name. And we would end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, dev, test, UAT, and prod. So that's one use case that you can do to change completely what your output is. And yes, important, you need to surround the m.name, or in this case, I would change the m.id in parentheses, because otherwise it's just not going to work. It's going to tell you an error. And if you put just env, then it's going to assume that this is a literal value, env. All right, so another example, you can use conditionals to transform the output using if, else, or match case. So for example, if we take this input And then we take the script. We have this input, which is an array of objects. And the object has ID, which is a number, value, which is a number, and count, which is a Boolean. So what we want to do here, we start with the accumulator as 0, which tells us that our output, our final output, is going to be a number. And then we do accumulator, so 0, plus, and then if item dot count, so if this is true, oh, how did I do that? If this is true, then you're going to append the item dot value. So this one here. Hello. And if this count is not true, like in this case, this is false, then this is going to be a 0. So it's going to be whatever the accumulator is plus 0. And we can try that. So let's log the accumulator. And then, can I just log all of this? Log value. So now let's see how many iterations that was. So we have the first accumulator, which is 0, and then we have value 10. Yes, because here this count is true, so our value is 10. And then our accumulator is 10. So now we go to the second one, and here our count is true, so our value is 20. We're going to add 20 plus 10. And now our accumulator is going to be 30. And then this one is false, so this has to be 0. So 30 plus 0 there. And then our final one is true. So we are going to end up with 30. 30 plus 0 is going to be 30. And then plus 5, which results in 35. I don't know why it's not, like I need to zoom out to be able to see it, but then you're not going to be able to see a lot. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And there's that. So that is the number of iterations that we did to end up with 35. And again, I cannot remove my initial value because my initial value will be an object, and this will not work. This is saying that we cannot use the plus operator with an object, and that is true. All right, so that's another case. Oh, and that's it. Cool. Well, if you want to see your example being featured, you can submit a DataWeave example using this form right here. As you can see, we have very basic examples, but if you want us to feature a more complex example that you have, then just submit your DataWeave example and we can create a tutorial with it. We can either work with you or create it on our own, whichever you prefer. We still give you credit for submitting. So cool, there's that. And we are at time, so let me know if you have questions. If not, then I'm gonna end this live stream for now. But please, please, please tell me if you have questions, if you want me to see a use case. Even though I'm at time, I can still go through some example or use case that you want to see. So feel free to tell me. You have a few seconds. Just say like, stop, or yes, I'm gonna tell you something, or like, I'm good. I don't know. Let me just take a sip of water. Can you send the link? For sure, for this tutorial. So I can only send it to Twitch, but I'm gonna show it right here. So developer.muleshub.com/tutorials and how-tos/DataWeave/reduce function. Or you can also just go to developer.mulesoft.com and follow the prompts. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if you go to developer.mulesoft.com, you will see the screen. I hope that the screen changes anytime soon. But you come here, you can click on Start Learning. It will take you to the tutorials and how-tos. And then you can just click on any of these that are at the top. So for example, this one, and it will take you to the Hello Meal. And here you will be able to change to whichever you want. So here in the left rail, we have DataWeave. And if you scroll down until the reduce function, you will be able to see this one. Or if you scroll down to the map function, then you will be able to see that one, if that's the one that you want. Notice that if you click on other tutorials, for example, the units, this will take you to our old site, which doesn't have the left-hand rail, and it looks in a different format. So just make sure you click on any of these at the top. So any of the part 1 through 7 for the getting started, or almost any of the DataWeave ones. You can click on the Learn DataWeave with the online tutorial, which is this one. Let me just close all of this. Or you can click on the 5 parts of the DataWeave as well. And that will also take you here. So yes, there's how you can access to our developer tutorials. Cool. Do you have any more questions? Do you want me to check something else? Are you cool with that? Everything was clear? In that case, then I'm just gonna tell you really quickly. So for those of you that are in LinkedIn right now, remember to go to your Twitch channel. So twitch.tv/mulesoft _ community. And that will take you to our Twitch channel where we have all of our recorded, previously live streamed videos. And also, not all of the live streamings that I do are on Twitch, only the biggest ones, but I reserve some other ones for the Twitch channel. So if you are not following us in the Twitch channel, I recommend that you do, because you will receive a notification as soon as I start streaming. And I stream more on Twitch than on LinkedIn. So if you try to see our previous live streamings, you will see more on Twitch, and you will not see that many on LinkedIn. Also, it's kind of hard to search for our live streamings on LinkedIn. It's just easier to do it from Twitch. Yay! Thank you, Louis. Yes, I just try my best. Also, tutorials were provided by MuleSoft Ambassador Joshua Ernie. So kudos to him. Yay. And another thing, if you want to follow us on LinkedIn, you just search for MuleSoft Community. You will be able to find us. It's a showcase page. It is where we're streaming right now. So there is where you can find us. And also on Twitter, if you go to @MuleDev, you will find our community there as well. Cool. So any other things that you want to talk about? Clear explanation. Yay. All right. I'm doing good. My job. I'm doing my job goodly. Doing my job well. Well job. Good job. All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.